Hi, everybody. Stacy here with the Community Cats Podcast. And we are here for a free webinar called From the Backyard to the Front Page Building a TNR Movement. And it's presented by Neighborhood Cats and hosted here with the team from the Community Cats Podcast. Susie Richmond is the Executive Director of Neighborhood Cats, having served in that role since 2010. She oversees hands-on TNR programs in New York City, Jersey City, and on the island of Maui, as well as using her prior Madison Avenue advertising experience to write, among other things, crowdfunding appeals to help the many sick and injured animals. So one of Susie's favorite projects currently is a veterinary scholarship program designed to train community cat-oriented vets on high-volume spay-neuter techniques. When she's not in the office, you can find Susie out in the fields of Maui, where she recently passed the 1,000 cats trapped mark. Brian Cordes serves as a Neighborhood Cats National Program Director and Susie Richmond's husband. Back in 1999, while working in Manhattan as both an attorney and a video director, Brian co-founded Neighborhood Cats after TNRing a colony near where he lived. Except for a 6-year stint as a grants manager for PetSmart Charities, he has been with the organization ever since. He has authored or co-authored handbooks on Grassroots TNR, Community TNR, and Return to Field programs. You can always find him online, where he regularly presents both basic and advanced webinars on all things Trap Neuter Return in partnership with the Community Cats Podcast.
Okay, thank you so much, Stacy. Thanks everybody for bearing with our little audio glitch there. I want to just mention at the outset that one of the handouts is are all the slides of today's presentation. So you don't have to stress about trying to take notes and things like that. Just download that. Now, if you are not seeing handouts on your control panel, then what you want to do is send an email or put it in the questions box and send an email to Stacy at communitycatspodcast.com and she can send you the handouts, or just put that in the questions box that you're not seeing the handout section. We also have the Neighborhood Cats TNR handbook as another handout just for your reference. So the topic today is about building a TNR movement. And this is a first in a series that we're doing. Neighborhood Cats is partnering with Community Cats Podcast to do a series on community level TNR policies and programs. So a lot of you probably know we do a lot of kind of the hands-on stuff. We have a monthly TNR training workshop with Community Cats Podcast, and we do another series of webinars which are about caretaking and trapping. This series is about the policy level. It's about if you're trying to run a program for your town or your city or your county, how would you go about doing this? And today's presentation focuses on how do you get a TNR program started in the first place, how do you grow it, and how do you get it to that community level as kind of step one. So I think what we're going to do today is kind of a two-part presentation. And the first part is just kind of a history of Neighborhood Cats and the lessons that, looking back, we can draw from that, which may be helpful to you. And then in the second part, we'll go over more general stuff about like what kind of services should you provide and equipment and things like that. So to begin, we have, Neighborhood Cats started as a very small grassroots group back in 1999. So geez, was that like getting near 25 years ago, 24 years ago. There were just 3 of us who were volunteers. We're living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and we were self-funded. So we didn't start as any kind of organization. Just literally 3 neighbors were interested in what was happening in our neighborhood. There were no spay-neuter programs for feral cats or community cats, as they're often referred to today in New York City at the time. You could, find a veterinarian or maybe the Humane Society or something who might fix 1 or 2 cats for you now and then, but there was nothing on an organized level. And the euthanasia rates for cats at the city shelters were extremely high. So this is the transformation that took place. And you can see in the year 2000, now neighborhood cats in the TNR program are not responsible for all of this drastic reduction. There were quite a few other programs going on, but it was a big part of it. And you could see where the intake of cats into animal care centers in New York City went from just under 30,000 to just under 10,000 by 2022, and euthanasia dropped by 95%. So again, there were, Maddie's Fund came in and did a huge program to incentivize pulling cats from the city shelters, and the ASPCA opened up free spay neuter for low income pet parents. And then the third leg of that was the TNR program, which over that course of time ended up sterilizing tens of thousands of community cats. So how did we get from 3 volunteer neighbors to a citywide program that could contribute to this kind of progress? So our very first colony was, well, the story of this colony it's a funny one, because people ask, like, well, how did you personally ever get involved in this? And it started with, I was just minding my own business one day and walking up the block where I lived, and I saw there's this empty grassy lot, kind of a rarity in on the Upper West Side to have an empty lot, but there it was between some buildings, and I saw a kitten jumping around behind a wrought iron fence, jumping around in the grass. And at the time, I had some friends who were involved in animal rescue. I wasn't myself, and I saw the one, and I thought, well, that's very manageable. I'll get a hold of the kitten, I'll call Marilyn and hand him off, and that'll take care of that. And then a couple of minutes later, I saw 2 more kittens jumping around, and I started to think, like, well, this is going to be a little harder than I thought, but I think it's still going to be quite manageable. 2 minutes later, I saw 2 more, and 5 little kittens jumping around, and I just knew that, I had this sinking feeling that my life was about to change forever. And sure enough, it did. So I started poking around and came upon a couple of other neighbors who were doing the same thing. And we discovered that in this inner courtyard of that particular square block, there were 30 cats and kittens. And they had all started from 2 a couple of years ago, and a kind-hearted person who put food out every day but did not spay or neuter. And 2 years later, there were 30 cats. So we developed, and I came upon my 2, partners who were also concerned about the situation, and we kind of found each other. We developed relationships with all the store owners in that area, the superintendents of the buildings, the doormen, the residents, and we scrounged around and we found some local vets who would agree to fix 1 or 2 at a time at a small cost. So this really all started with this one colony, and you can see some of that terrain here, and that's patches in the foreground. And if you look up to your upper left, you'll see a gray cat sitting on the fire escape. So this became our, and I want to emphasize that this was not planned. We didn't think like, oh, we have a model colony now. I'm kind of looking back and pulling out the lessons of what we kind of accidentally did right. So we made this essentially a model colony. The goal was to get 100% of the cats spayed and neutered, which took some time, but we did get there. We pulled all the kittens who could be socialized and friendly adults out in the beginning and placed them in homes, which again was not an easy or cheap or a quick thing to do, but that's how we went about it. And we were really zealous in our caretaking, probably overzealous to the point where we got kicked out of a couple of places because we were always around. But we made sure they had excellent food and twice a day, and that they had excellent warm winter shelter. We did everything as well as we possibly could, and we documented everything. And that was huge in retrospect. So we collected data on each cat, when were they trapped, when were they fixed, what was their outcome. We took photographs, we kept records. And this is another kitty from that very first colony named Misty. We were successful. The colony size within a year dropped from 30 to 12, and a lot of that had to do with the adoptions. We had far fewer nuisance complaints right away, and there was the only kittens that were born after that first year were from one very elusive cat who took us several years before we could catch her in a drop trap. Again, the idea for your purposes, those of you listening today, is the idea that we didn't run around all over the place trying to grab cats wherever we can or whoever asked, or we were very, very focused because we were not thinking let's build a movement. We were just thinking we want to help these particular cats. So we really were laser focused on making this one colony as successful as it could be. In part, that was because I know I personally was pretty skeptical in the beginning. I mean, when we first realized there were 30 cats, I like to say I did what any good citizen would do in a situation like that, which was try to find someone else to take care of the problem for me. But when I called up shelters and rescues and the city shelter, there was no help available for community cats, zero. We could have trapped them and dropped them off at the shelter where they would probably have been euthanized, and that was really it. So when Trap Neuter Return was introduced to us as a concept, my thought was, well, why not? We really have no other alternatives, and I wasn't sure it would work. So I think we just did this one model colony to see, can you do TNR in a dense urban environment like Manhattan and have it be successful? And it turned out it was. So that kind of created the first building block for moving forward. So one of the concepts about doing a model colony and focusing on one is, especially in the very beginning, we had, even if we could afford it financially, there were not very many veterinarians who were going to work with us to do community cat spay neuter. We used to go around and try to find veterinarians who had just opened their office because they needed the cash and they were happy, and they liked the idea of, sharpening their surgery skills. So capacity was extremely limited. And here's the thing, if you aren't focused and you just kind of spread yourself too thin with your limited resources, let's take this as a hypothetical, what you're seeing on your screen. So you've got 5 colonies with 5 cats each, but you only have 5 surgeries, right? And you have to decide how are you going to distribute them, allocate them among these 5 colonies. And you could do what many programs even today still think of as the fair way to do it, right? So let's say each of these colonies has their own caretaker and they all want surgeries. So you're fair and you give 1 to each of the 5. Now, how does that look like on the ground in terms of cat population? Well, you see here you have a 20% sterilization rate in each colony. And the problem with that is that's great for the cat that gets spayed or neutered, but you still, in each colony, you still have 4 out of the 5 cats who are able to reproduce. And they will continue to mate, and there will be as many cats as that environment can support. And when we talk about how many cats an environment support, the fancy term is carrying capacity. And that has to do with how much food is available, how adequate is the shelter. And any given environment has a carrying capacity, and the number of cats will be equal to what, if nothing is done, if there's no spay-neuter intervention or otherwise, the number of animals present will equal the amount of that the food source can support. Now, with cats, that food source can be what's called fungible, meaning it can grow because somebody can just keep putting out more and more food, but eventually you're going to hit the ceiling. It's a little easier to think about it like, let's say it's the dumpster behind the supermarket, and they put out enough food every day to support 20 cats. And lo and behold, there's 20 cats back there. Now, if you do nothing, the myth is that, well, those 20 cats will be, in 2 years, there'll be 5,000 of them. Well, of course, that's silly. There'll still only be 20 because that's the amount of food that's available. When a colony hits its carrying capacity, then you start to see things like disease. You see male cats killing kittens. You see migration. Nature takes over and keeps the balance between what the resources that are available and the number of animals that are using them. So in this case, in our hypothetical that we're looking at, if each colony has a carrying capacity of 5, or looks like the one on the upper right might have 6, because I can't count to 5, then you're always fixing one cat is not going to alter the population demographics. You will continue to have 5 cats there indefinitely because you haven't altered the reproductive capacity enough to alter the number, to alter the population. So those 4 out of 5 cats that are not fixed will reproduce to the point where they will keep the colonies at 5. So with a 20% sterilization rate, you've accomplished absolutely nothing in terms of reducing the population, the overall population of cats. Now, if we took those 5 surgeries and instead of being fair, we tried to be effective, this is what we call colony level targeting. And we took all 5 surgeries and we concentrated on one colony and we got them 100% spay neutered. Then in that colony, you could overcome, you would start to, if you're keeping an eye out and removing new cats as they come, you would start to see the population dropping over time because they can't reproduce. So as they get adopted or they die or whatever means they may migrate away, the number of cats will go down. So now when you look at the overall picture, you have a population because one part of the other 4 colonies are remaining stable. They're at their carrying capacity, but the one colony is going down. So overall, you're going down. And in a TNR program, the way you achieve population decline throughout the community is by having a growing number of 100% sterilized colonies. It's not about how many cats you fix necessarily, but how well you allocate what you do have. And now the more colonies you can get 100% spayed and neutered, the faster your overall population will go down. But even if you just fix 1 and then maybe 2 the next year, but you go about it the right way, you will start to see some decline as opposed to spreading your resources too thinly like we were talking about before, and you achieve 0 decline. So that's what the model colony kind of taught us back in the beginning of neighborhood cats. So once we saw success, we saw a stable colony where the population had gone from 30 to 12. Growth started to happen in terms of the program, and the way that happened was just word of mouth. And at that time, there was almost like a colony of feral cats behind every building or within every square block. And when people heard that the situation where we were had greatly improved, there weren't as many cats, they weren't waking people up in the middle of the night, it didn't smell in the backyards, they wanted the same thing done behind their building. So people started to ask us to come over and help them. And This is another thing that, I can't take credit for having figured it out at the time, but when we look backwards, we went about this in a very methodical way. It was driven largely by the fact that all of us had full-time jobs, and the Upper West Side is where we lived. So that's where we would continue to work as we spread out from our model colony. So next we TNR'd the colony that was right across the street. And then we did others on nearby blocks. And the kind of, if you throw a pebble in the pond and the circles expand, that's kind of how we started to grow our program. In the course of growing the program, again, driven by the fact that we were volunteers and had limited amount of time, we did whatever we could to maximize caretaker participation. So we were not available to do everything because we had plenty of requests for help, and we were not a do-it-all service for you. It wasn't enough to just make a phone call and tell us there were cats you wanted fixed because join the line, right? So we would work with people who would actively participate and contribute to the project, and that might be they would assist with the trapping, or they would provide holding space to keep the cats while we're trapping, or transport, or funding, or they would feed, and then we would our little group would fill in the gaps, which usually consisted of trapping and helping to feed the cats while they were confined in their traps. It grew to the point where eventually we decided to incorporate and started doing some basic fundraising, and we got some small grants. And the grants came from going back to that model colony where we had documented everything and we had taken photos. So we were able to make a nice little presentation to funders about how TNR worked and why you should give us money to do more of it. So then we branched out to a local park, which was Riverside Park, which is along the Hudson River and stretches the part of the park where we worked went from 72nd to 96th Street. So that's a little over 2 miles long. And there were 4 colonies spread out throughout that part of Riverside Park, a total of about 65 cats. And we developed a very strong network of caretakers, meaning the people who went in there every day and fed. And I think one of the crucial things in our growth was that we were working with the local government, with the New York City Parks Department, and they provided assistance with trapping and access to their facilities, and allowed us to manage the cats, to get them on a feeding pattern, to go in and trap them and enter otherwise parts of the park maybe we wouldn't be able to get to. And that turned out to be a very successful project too, to the point where eventually, it took some time over the course of 15 years or so. We reduced the population to 1 cat, and I believe that cat is now has either passed away or has been brought indoors. So now, of course, parks attract cats, and there's I'm not going to say there's 0 cats there today, but at one point we did get it down to 0 through this particular project. And then we got letters of recommendation from the head of the Parks Department, who was thrilled with the whole thing. And again, we've created another example of TNR success. Basically, what we ended up doing is creating what I would call a model neighborhood. So after 2.5 years, we had, and you can see this represented by the dots on the map, which is a screenshot from a program called Cat Stats that we'll talk about later. But basically, each one of those pins represents a colony, and the green ones are 100% fixed, and the yellow ones still have some that need to be done, and the red, nobody's been done, and the gray are extinct. So basically, you can see we concentrated our efforts on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. When we then decided to go citywide with our program, we went to Animal Care Centers of New York City, which does animal control. And we told them what we'd been doing. We said, hey, we've been working on the Upper West Side for 2.5 years. We think this program is very successful. And the first thing the director did was go into his data to see what kind of impact we'd had on stray cats coming into his facility. And he found that the area we'd been working in, the intake had dropped by 73%, as compared to a slight rise elsewhere in the city. So again, concentrating, focusing, creating a model on a neighborhood scale produced the data we needed to persuade city officials and shelter officials that this was a good idea and to get behind it. Now, let's talk about that concept of a model neighborhood a little bit. So we talked about colony level targeting and about how important it is to get as close to 100% of the cats in a group spayed and neutered as possible. Now, if that's all you're doing, you're only doing what we call colony level targeting, which is a lot. It's a great thing to do when I say only, but if that's the one tactic you're using throughout your community, and now we're talking not just about a neighborhood, we're talking about the whole city or the whole town. This is what it looks like, right? You've got these colonies of cats scattered all over the place, and you're kind of picking colonies here and there to get to 100% spay neutered. So you have these little islands that you see here of where TNR has been implemented. Now, the problem with this should be kind of obvious when you see it on this scale, right? Because your little island of red there, where the colony is fixed, is surrounded by colonies of cats who are not spayed and neutered. And we talked about carrying capacity and how what happens when the number of cats starts to outstrip the resources that are available. Well, one of the things that happens is the cats start looking for new food sources. And if you have a colony of cats that is declining in population, like in the red circle, but the food source is still steady, then all of a sudden you have, as the population drops, you have unutilized resources, right? You have enough food for 5 cats, but you only have 4. Well, those surrounding colonies are likely to quickly fill that gap, and a new cat will move in, and the old cats are not likely to try to keep them out if there's enough food. They will start to guard their territory when there isn't enough food for new cats, but when there is, they don't, it's sort of like join the party. So you get this kind of partial vacuum effect of unutilized resources attracting cats in. So there is a way around that, though, and that's when you not only target colonies, but you target colonies in a section of your community. So we're talking about the exact same number of surgeries, where only difference is how we allocate them. And now on the lower right of your screen, you see, well, we haven't done 6 scattered colonies throughout our city. We've done 6 that are right next to each other. And this is going to help us as the population starts to drop from having new cats moving in. And you can, if you cast a wide enough net, you can reduce the overall population. And that's what we had inadvertently done when we just worked on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. We had basically counteracted that vacuum effect of having cats move in order to take away and take advantage of unutilized resources. So your most effective approach to trap, neuter, return is this combination of colony level and community level targeting. So you don't just target the cats in a colony and get them 100%. You also target colonies in a specific area, not scattered throughout. And then you can get the results that we got on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So success breeds success, and it's important to understand that real life examples are much more persuasive than theory, and that's part of the reason why I'm going over our history. Is it's not theoretical; it's something that we actually experienced. People facing similar issues, which there are usually all over when it comes to community cats, they see that you have a solution, and that starts to attract donors and grantors, and it provides that foundation you need for expanding into the wider community. So think about what we could have done instead. Like we could have done a colony, that first colony, and maybe we could have done like, 70% of the cats, and not had as much success and continued to have litters of kittens for a more extended period of time. And then we could have gotten calls from all over the city, and instead of concentrating on the Upper West Side, we could have run to Brooklyn and done a colony there, and then gone up to the Bronx and done a colony there. And we would not have created this foundation that allowed us to grow, because we would not have been able to demonstrate this kind of success that we experienced. So remember to document everything. Track your impact on colony size. How many cats were there when you started? How many cats were there after? Keep track of the outcomes. Shelter data, especially intake, is real important. If you're in a community where shelter intake is either not available, or for whatever reason it's not a meaningful statistic, because maybe it's not open admission, or they change their hours, or they won't give it to you, you can still track data. You can track the requests that will come into you for your assistance, and keep, just put it on a spreadsheet. What address, what neighborhood, where are they from, how many cats. You can municipalities often track complaint calls, dead on arrival. When there's severe cat overpopulation, like when we first arrived in Maui, I guess 6-7 years ago. I mean, it's terrible to see, but there were dead cats all over the place on the roads. And fast forward to today, and it's rare. It's a rare thing. So shelters track what are called DOAs, dead on arrivals. So you can get those statistics. Rabies exposures, that's what public health departments care the most about, because they're very, very expensive. If one mama, in one county, we worked in, a mama cat and her kittens ended up exposing over 30 people to rabies, and they all had to be treated at a cost of about $3,000 each. So if you can keep track of rabies exposures doesn't mean that people catch rabies, because you don't wait to find out. If you do, they're all going to die. So as soon as somebody's potentially exposed, they get treated. So if the number of rabies exposures from cats is something that you can correlate your TNR program to a reduction in that, that's going to be very persuasive evidence that it's a good program. And of course, photos, videos, that'll always documenting what you do. I mentioned the program to track colonies. We do have a program called Cat Stats. We're not handling new applications until March, just as a word of warning, because we're busy winding up a rescue project we've been doing for 6 months in the Maui wildfire burn zone. But this program, it's $50 fee to start it, and it basically tracks colonies of cats. It doesn't track individual cats, but it will track where they're located, and caretaker contact information, and how many cats were there when you started, and how many cats are there now, and how many cats are fixed. And it creates those maps that I showed you, and allows for kind of a good visual on where your work is. And if you're trying to do that and concentrate and target specific areas, it's great to have that visual guide. So go to catstats.org, and you can learn more about it there. But again, it can be very, very helpful. We use it in New York City where we're tracking, I forget how many it is now, it's 3,000 or 4,000 colonies of cats throughout the city. Another thing about expanding and lessons learned from our experience, starting at Neighborhood Cats is, all right, so how do you gain those additional resources? And like I say, we approached the city shelter, and we also approached the ASPCA and the larger animal welfare agencies in the city, and we just showed them what we'd been doing and talked to them and advocated for more resources from their organizations and more focus um, on community cats. And don't be surprised if they're not as aware as you are of what's going on. Um, community cats tend to be hidden. If you're not working on the street level, you may not even realize they're there. We actually approached one very large agency, and the first thing they said was, "What feral cat problem?" They didn't realize that we had probably at least 200,000 or 300,000 of them living on the streets, but they were open to learning, and once they were educated about it, they became very supportive. Now, a great way to get an agency involved or persuade a government officials to support you is to do pilot projects. So with animal care centers of New York City, we didn't ask them dive in the deep end and commit huge amounts of resources and give us your full support. Instead, what we said was, let's do a pilot project together. And we gave them a list of colonies that we could work on and let them pick 3 or 4 of them. Of course, we were very careful about which colonies were on the list. We made sure there were not impossible situations where we had reliable people. And they ended up having a very good experience with this pilot. It was very important when you do the pilot to create a hands-on role for the organizations that you're working with. So we did the trapping, Neighborhood Cats did the trapping, but they did the transport and they held the cats and they arranged for the surgeries. So they got a real firsthand look, and that really solidified TNR as their favored solution to community cat situations. So what are roles for, it's always good if you can not say, what can you do for me, but if you can say, here's what you can do for me. So animal control can provide support for official approval of trap, neuter, return. If you go to your city council and your ACO is by your side, that's going to be a lot more persuasive than if you're alone. They can refer complaint calls and inquiries about community cats to your organization. One of the things we started in New York City was what we call ear-tipped cat alerts. So when a cat with an ear tip was intaked at a city shelter, Neighborhood Cats was notified about and given the address where the cat came from. And we were often able to, through our growing network of caretakers, we were able to identify the caretaker of the cat, who was then able to return to reclaim them as a return to owner. That really motivated caretakers to join our program because they knew if their cats were ear tipped and they ever ended up in the city shelter, that they would hear about it, that they would have an opportunity to get that cat. Whereas in the past, ear tip cat going in, how are you even going to know they're there? And after a certain amount of time, they, often cannot be placed in a home, so they would be euthanized. Sharing, they can collect and share data to help you. And again, I mentioned joint projects. So what you see in this slide was New York City Animal Control and Neighborhood Cats. We did a joint TNR project in a park of about 30 cats. And they were, hands-on, involved in every aspect of it. And again, that helped solidify their support. So we talked about pilot projects, be careful if you succeed in getting one, that you select the sites carefully. Don't pick the most difficult ones. Make sure you have adequate resources and cooperative caretakers. We prioritized government agencies as we began to expand citywide. There's a lot of agencies that manage land, and if they manage land, they're going to manage land with cats. So Parks Department, Sanitation Department, Transportation, Police, Corrections, Fire, whenever they called about a cat situation, they went to the top of our list of who we were going to work with, because we figured that was one of the fastest ways to embed TNR in the local culture, was to have government agencies experience it, see the results firsthand, and then become advocates for us. What you see in this slide is, and we'll show you a little video of this project. This is the Department of Sanitation at the Fresh Kills Landfill, which at the time was the primary city dump. And on that note, let me play you just a little clip of the project we did there, just to kind of give you a feel for what the work looked like, and just it's kind of fun to watch. Okay.
At its peak, Fresh Kills was the largest landfill in the country, with tons of garbage coming in every day and hundreds of workers. It was the perfect place for feral cats, and a large colony survived there for years. But when they shut the place down, leaving just a skeleton crew, the cats lost their food sources and began to starve and get sick. Rather than going away, they came in closer, getting into the buildings and offices. They kept reproducing too, with most of the kittens dying. When neighborhood cats learned of the situation, we got permission to do a TNR project at the site. Okay. Hi, sweeties. Over the course of a few days, we trapped almost all of the 40 or so cats, coming back later to get the few we missed. Here we go. Sweet. All right, we got it. Well, you were a hard catch, sweetheart. You were not easy. That cat did it again. Right over. Yeah. See on the outside. Come on, baby. Oh, got it. That's all there is to it. Then they step on this.
It's 33.
33?
Okay.
Okay, so the next one's going to be 34.
All right, that's good.
We held the cats in the employees' lunchroom, and the ASPCA brought their mobile spay-neuter van out and fixed most of them. We let the cats recuperate for a couple of days after the surgery, then released them back outside. We also arranged for a constant food supply. With no more kittens and healthier cats, the crisis was resolved.
So there you see, and that kind of became, then we started getting requests from other parts of the sanitation department to work on other locations as well. Our biggest breakthrough was Rikers Island, which is the largest jail in the country and a fairly notorious place. There are actually 11 different jails on the island, ranging from minimum to maximum security. And with that project, we were able to, with such a large scale one, there were hundreds of cats, and the island's about 440 acres. And you have to go in and out of yards and all around the perimeter. It really kind of a complex project. We were able to pull together all the different animal agencies in the city to work on this. So neighborhood cats handled the trapping and the overall coordination. And then the ASPCA, as well as Animal Care Centers of New York City, sent their mobile spay neuter clinics onto the island once a week in the beginning. And the Humane Society of New York provided care for any special cases like injured cats or very sick cats. And we were also able to bring in what were other brand new TNR groups who had started to sprout up and bring them onto the island and train them in mass trapping techniques, how to trap entire colonies at once. And it kind of caught the imagination of the press, the concept being that the people were in the cages and the cats were the ones who were free. They loved that juxtaposition. So ended up in all the local media with New York Times and New York Post, New York Daily News. Got several TV article pieces on it. Was in Cat Fancy magazine. So it ended up getting huge amount of publicity, and that of course drove even more interest in trap neuter return and people wanting it done in their neighborhoods. So pretty much solidified what TNR was and that it was a solution to a longstanding problem throughout all of New York City. And then I think the lesson that we drew from that you can take is, seek out high profile projects, things that we call media magnets, prioritize them. Just like you would prioritize working with a government agency. If you see an opportunity to do a TNR project and it's going to translate into a lot of media interest, you want to, especially in the beginning, you want to jump and make that jump to head of the line. So in our experience, jails and prisons are media magnets, sports stadiums, any major tourist attractions in your area, also college campuses. And again, let me emphasize, you're building a movement, so you have to not be random about it. It can't just be the first person who called is the next person who gets your help. You have to be, you only have so much time, so many resources. You want to be strategic in the beginning and kind of choose your projects. Don't let your projects choose you. And because they're all deserving cats, so you might as well help as many as you can, but in a way that will grow your resources, grow your popularity, grow your name recognition. So with that kind of growth, as you can imagine, we could not handle, what were becoming the flood of interest. So then we started doing workshops, and we figured we can't do TNR for everybody in New York City, but we can teach everybody who's interested how to do it themselves and save them the learning curve, the 2-3 year learning curve that we had gone through. So we started hosting training workshops, and that, now this doesn't work in every community. It works in communities where there's a fairly large population. You don't need millions of people, but it's not going to work in a small town with hundreds, right? You need enough of a pool of people that they're going to fill your classrooms and then go back and practice it. So training workshops are very good if you have a population to draw from. And in those workshops, you're teaching basic TNR protocols, how to trap, also how to access local services. How do you make a spay neuter appointment? Who offers traps for free? Things like that. And we created what we call certification, meaning that if you attended the workshop, it gave you access to resources you wouldn't get otherwise, such as low cost or free, at the time, free spay neuter, and again, assistance from neighborhood cats in terms of coaching, kind of a suite of services where that door opened by attending a 2-3 hour workshop. Now, of course, the Community Cats podcast and Neighborhood Cats offer monthly TNR certification workshops online, so you don't need to worry about that part of it. You just need to decide, are you going to make that a requirement for access to the services that you're providing to your community? Okay, so on that note, before we get into the more general part, kind of gone over the history of neighborhood cats now, and now we'll start to talk about more generally the specifics of the program that you might want to create. I want to emphasize that it's not one size fits all, that I'm drawing from our experience in New York City, but every community is going to be a little bit different. And if you are in a rural or a small town, it's going to be a lot different. And you may adopt the complete opposite model. One of the things I used to talk about early on when I would talk about community TNR programs was the difference between a local, an expert and a grassroots approach. So if you take an expert approach, basically your TNR program is kind of handling almost everything. And that's because you're working with a rural or a small, relatively small population base, and you're just not going to have that pool of people that you could pull a lot of volunteers out of. In that case, you as the TNR program may have to do a lot more of the steps, and that may be very doable given the size of your community. And that would be an expert approach. A more grassroots approach would be what we did in New York City, which is to try to where it's just not physically possible for one group to handle the kind of volume. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of cats, so in that situation, it's essential to create more involvement and to do what you can not to have to do. And with an expert group, your kind of program, you're doing as much as you can, and with a grassroots program, you're doing as little as you can, so that you can spread what resources you have as far as possible. So my focus today is on the grassroots program, but understand that it may not apply. You may, but I think you could probably still pull out elements that will be helpful for you. So this is the route, the path that a caretaker in New York City would follow, and still does follow to this day, in order to participate in TNR. So the first step is actually our step as the program, which is to let people know that we're here and that we're available and that we have resources to offer. So that can be, well, these days, a lot of that would be social media. What you're seeing there were posters that were space that was donated in local malls. We also got space donated in local newspapers. So again, these days, probably a lot more online, but the basic idea is just to get the word out and let people know you're available. Somebody would see our outreach and then contact us. So step 2 is they're calling us. Once they were interested, we, with the contact, we would explain what trap neuter return is, and just a very kind of quick sketch of the process. Now, for the majority of people calling in, most people are what we call able-bodied, right? Meaning they're physically capable of doing a TNR project. Now, that doesn't mean they want to or will, but they can. So we're trying in a grassroots situation where we're being flooded with requests and we're trying to maximize our impact and get the most we can out of what resources. We're looking for those people who are not only able-bodied, but are willing. And if somebody, and this can evolve over time as your program grows. Now it's, obviously 24 years later in New York City, we can help a lot more people. We can help a lot more people who are disabled, who just are not physically able to do the work. We can even help people who could do the work, but, oh, I'm too busy, I'm my kid, my job, my this. We can help them now. But in the very beginning, when this is just a real important point for those of you who are starting out, in the beginning of the program, you're trying to find people who can do it and will do it. And you're going to have to be tough about that and not go, because you could spend all your time helping one difficult caretaker who can't contribute anything. And in all that time and resources you spend on that one project, you could have trained 10 other people who would have done the work, and you would have had a much bigger impact with your time and resources. So in the beginning, you have to find those people. So we would explain that, you got to participate. Again, we would make exceptions for high priority top, if it was a government agency, we would do a lot more, for example, or occasionally you do get a very sympathetic case, and you just help them because usually they're elderly or they can't lift a trap, something like that. But you have to focus your effort on people who can and will. So those people attend a training. Nowadays, like I said, you can use our monthly workshops if you'd like to, or set up your own. And then after that, after they've been trained and not just how to trap, but also how to access local services, you let them schedule the spay neuter and arrange to pick up equipment. You're not doing that for them. You may help them with, hey, here's where the services are, but they need to make that call. They need to schedule that stuff. The trapping, ideally, again, they're doing the trapping. What we found as a program is, especially as we develop more and more volunteers, is that if we send somebody on the first day of a trapping, a volunteer who's an expert, the project goes a lot better. So you might consider having what we call TNR coaches. You might consider having that as part of it. But again, the bulk of the work is the responsibility of the caretaker. Also, the transport and the recovery post-surgery is the caretaker's responsibility, and then the release. So you're hearing me say a lot of steps that the caretaker is responsible for. That's how a grassroots program grows. Because if you were to do all the steps, you'd be very limited in your reach. You could only help so many people. But if you get them to do it, you can end up helping a lot more cats. So here's an example of outreach. I mentioned, the different places that you can use to different channels. Again, nowadays, social media is going to be probably right up there at the top. Talked about prioritizing requests. So really you can break it down into these three categories that may be helpful for you in terms of prioritizing. So your number one audience are people who are willing and able, and that's your prime audience. Next would be people who would be willing, but they're not able, such as elderly and disabled. So that would become your number two priority. And the last people you want to help are the ones who are perfectly capable of doing it, but they're just not willing to. Now, in the future, you may develop a paid service where they pay you to do it. But you got to be careful about that, because you really should be spending most of your time on number one, not trying to make money on number three. Although once in a while that can be helpful for bringing in resources. So training workshops, we kind of talked about the things that you can convey. Again, you want to teach people how to trap cats in a way that's effective, but it's safe, so they're never putting their hands on the cats, and you're teaching them about trap dividers and things like that. You're emphasizing the importance of getting as close to all the cats as you can, spayed and neutered, and mass trapping, which is the what we teach in the workshops, which is getting all the cats in a group fixed at the same time. You can discuss neighbor relations, best practices. So I want to pause for a moment on that concept, which is when you're introducing trap, neuter, return to your community, they're going to look to you as the expert for what should be done. So you have an opportunity in the beginning to set the standard of care. When we started Neighborhood Cats back in the day, whether to do FELV or FIV testing on every single cat that was TNR'd was a controversial topic, and it was controversial mostly because if the cat tested positive, the usual outcome was euthanasia, and there's all sorts of problems with that. But we set the standard as you don't test unless there's something wrong with the cat, and the veterinarian wants the test as part of as a diagnostic tool. So we didn't get into the controversy in New York City about should you test or should you not, because we just told everybody you shouldn't, and they just went with that. So you have an opportunity in the beginning to use these workshops to define how TNR should be done. And of course, the service providers in your area, the veterinarians and the other groups who offer any TNR related resources, are really going to appreciate the fact that you're teaching people how to properly access them, how to schedule appointments, where to go, when to pick up, when to drop off, so that the more people are kind of compliant with service providers' protocols, the more willing they're going to be to provide those services. Talked about certification, and these are the types of things that in New York City, having TNR certification gives you access to. So again, free or discount spay neuter. We have trap banks where we offer, we require minimal deposits because we figure if you've gone through the workshop, you're probably not going to run off with our equipment. Coaches, transportation, again, we're trying to fill in any gaps that people have. So maybe they have everything, but they in New York City, a lot of people don't have a place to hold the cats for a couple of nights. So we will help you find somebody who provides that service and help fund that. Food and shelter giveaways. And you can take your certification list if you want and share it with other service providers in your area if they want to use that as a prerequisite as well. So I mentioned the TNR certification workshop that Neighborhood Cats does in partnership with Community Cats Podcast, and the next one coming up is on March 9th. You can register at the communitycatspodcast.com website, and it is now approved for National Animal Care and Control Association CE continuing education credit as well. So a nice thing to offer if you can, it's not always possible, but if you can offer follow-up in-field training, that can really solidify what people learn in the classroom. So it's could be like if you're working in an area where kind of holding classes is not going to work because your population base is too small, you could instead consider doing this kind of a model where you are going out, but in the course of trapping and doing the hands-on work, you're teaching the caretaker, you're at least require them to be present so they can see how a trap is set, so they know how to handle the cat afterwards. So they know to cover the trap, how to use trap dividers to feed and clean, and expand and train as much as you can. And what we found is that each community kind of has a limit. So in New York City, we can get people, to attend a 2.5 hour online class. But if you're in a rural town and you've got 20 minutes when you're dropping the traps off, then that's what you got, and you want to get the most out of it. So do the training that you can. If you have to limit it to hands-on stuff, then do that, because it's a huge help to you if the caretaker knows how to set the trap, and then you don't have to be there for every moment of what's going on. So essentially what we're talking about when you're running a community level TNR program is creating this network of services. And you can break it down into these 3 categories. There's the field work, right? You need traps, you need transport, expert assistance, holding space. That's all part of the actual work out in the field. In terms of veterinary, low-cost surgeries are going to, basically the formula is that the lower the cost, the more the TNR that happens. So, on one extreme, if the surgeries are free or they're $10 each, you're going to get a lot of demand. If the surgeries are $200 each, it's going to obviously have less demand. And the point is that you can make it work at any price point. So you just do the best you can, but have it in the back of your mind that, hey, the lower I can get this price point, the more cats I'm going to end up getting fixed. Think about extra veterinary care, especially when you walk into a overpopulated cat situation. You may have illness or injuries, and being able to provide that extra vet care and figuring out who's going to provide it and how are you going to pay for it can be really important things. Now, in the very beginning, you may not have those resources, and the answer may be we can't take on the responsibility for Fluffy's care. That's something you're going to have to do. We can point you to the lowest cost veterinarian, but you're going to have to take it from there. As your program grows, you'll have more opportunities to help these special cases because your fundraising capacity can grow and your network grows. And we do things at Neighborhood Cats now we call urgent cat appeals when we get cats who are in really bad shape and looks like they're going to run up a large veterinary bill. Well, we can tap into our network now and just present and say, hey, this cat needs this. Can you donate a little bit? And just through crowdfunding, we can usually cover a lot of the bills. Not for every single cat, but for a lot of them. And then you also want to provide support to ongoing caretaking. Because again, the TNR is kind of the trapping is the glamour part, so to speak. But then there's years of care that's provided. So things like food giveaways and shelter, providing winter shelters and creating online opportunities for networking can be very helpful. And so we'll go into these in a little more detail. So trap banks. Think about the person who just bought a house and looks into his backyard and sees six community cats, right? And they're not fixed. So this person wants to assist, is willing to attend a training workshop, but probably what they're not willing to do is go out and buy 6 traps at $100 a pop, potentially in addition to paying for some of the veterinary expenses and the transport, only to use those traps one time. Because a lot of your grassroots participation are not going to be from people who want to be animal rescuers the rest of their life. It's going to be from people who encounter a particular situation, they want to solve that situation, and then they're done. So they're not going to spend a lot of money on equipment for a one-time project. So the program needs to provide that. And that's where trap banks come in. And some of the details would be you want your traps to be, we prefer 30 inches. Some programs prefer 36. The smaller they are, the more somebody can fit in their car, the easier they are to lift. And we find the 30 inches are plenty of room for the traps to double as cages, which is something we go over in our basic training workshop. But they need to be at least 30 inches, and they need to have a sliding rear door so that the trap can double as a cage and the caretaker can access the trap from either end. You're going to want trap dividers, also called trap isolators. Make sure they're strong enough, and the only brands we recommend are Tomahawk or True Catch in terms of their fitness for this type of work. Also, drop traps are an essential tool for getting that last cat or that litter of kittens with their mother. So we do in partnership with the Community Cats podcast, we do a free webinar on how to use a drop trap. So check that out. The last one is recorded, and you can find it on the link on the Community Cats podcast website. Okay, moving on from trap banks. Oh, one last thing about trap banks, in case I don't mention it in the next slide, is okay. I think I do. So how many traps do you need? That's going to depend on your spay-neuter capacity. So generally, you want to have twice as many traps as capacity. So if your program is able to arrange, or your community is able to provide 20, just using an arbitrary number, say 20 surgeries a week, you want to have 40 traps, because you don't want to wait till the traps come back before the next round can begin, right? So you got 20 traps out there and they're filled with cats, and now they're going to be held. The next person isn't going to be able to pick them up until the whole TNR process is over. That's going to be very clunky in terms of timing. So you want the next round to be ready to go before the first round is over. And one very, very important tip that is, don't try to avoid running a trap bank by appointment, meaning that each individual arranges a time with you or your program to come by and pick up and drop off traps, because people will drive you crazy. They'll want to come at all different times. They'll cancel at the last minute. Some people won't show up. They'll come the next day. You can do it if you have that kind of patience. We found it just wasted an awful lot of our time, and so we switched to, hey, the trap bank's open from 10 a.m. to noon on Saturday, and that's when you got to come. When you pick it up, that's when you drop it off, and it works. It's worked quite well. Trapping support, we talked about having a TNR coach, which is somebody experienced in TNR, being there on the first day and then acting as somebody who the caretaker can call for advice. Also, you can provide ongoing email and phone advice while the trapping's going on. And as your program grows and you have more and more people experienced, you want to create a volunteer network where people are helping each other. And that's where kind of online forums come in really handy, is, hey, I need help. I'm going out of town for a few days. Can somebody feed my colony? Or I need an extra spay neuter spot, or I can't find I need help with transport. And then people start to solve problems among themselves without you and your program having to get in the middle of it. And that is obviously the most efficient way possible for it to go. Holding space is where you're going to be holding the cats, the caretaker's holding the cats before the surgery, and then for 1 or 2 days afterwards. Any space that's warm, dry, and secure, meaning it's at least 65 degrees Fahrenheit post-surgery, because otherwise, cats can't, when they're under anesthesia, they lose control of their body temperature. So if you take a cat who's still under anesthesia and you put them in a cold space, that could potentially be fatal. So depending on the protocols of the clinic and when you get the cats back, you want to make sure the space is warm enough for them. Dry, obviously protected from the weather and secure that other animals and people not associated with your project can't get in. What you're looking at here is what we call the TNR via at the Maui Humane Society, and it's kind of the gold standard. There's lots of space. The traps are up on tables. The tables are lined with contractor paper, and pardon me if you hear my dove is yelling in the background. He's tired of me talking. But it doesn't have to be as fancy as this. We've had holding space in people's garages, in their basements. We've rented vans to keep them in, parked in, safely if they're secure in people's driveways. We've used warehouses, empty store spaces, empty rooms and houses, you name it. It can be a holding space. Transport can be a big issue. So if you step in as a program and help with that, it can be a big help. Think about the different elements of transport. You have to pick up traps, drop off traps. You have to drive the cats to and from the spay-neuter clinic, and you have to transport the cats from the colony site to the holding space and eventually back to the colony site. So if somebody doesn't have a large SUV or something like that, then maybe getting a volunteer to help with the transport or funding a van for a couple of days can help make a TNR project happen. We talked about spay neuter. The lower the cost, the higher the participation. Point number 2 is a real important one where we see a lot of mistakes in community TNR programs, which is again that idea of fairness, that we have 10 people who are asking for slots and we've got 50 of them at our next clinic, so we're going to give everybody 5. Well, that's great for the people, but it doesn't maximize the impact of your surgeries on the cat population, which is supposed to be the goal, right? We're not a social services agency as a TNR program. Our ultimate clients are the cats, and we want to make sure that we're maximizing our positive impact on them, and of course helping the caretakers along the way. But doling out surgeries by some rote kind of, well, we have this many, we're going to divide by the caretakers, doesn't get you to high sterilization levels. And so, as we talked about before, does not help maximize the reduction over time of the cat population. Make sure that usually clinics offer special rates for TNR cats, lower rates. A lot of people will try to game that system. By requiring that the cats be ear tipped, you will not eliminate that gaming of the system, but you can at least greatly reduce it. 1 cat per trap covered. If you're working with veterinarians who are not experienced with feral cats, you want to train them how to handle them. Don't transfer the cats out of traps into cages. Leave them in the traps, show them how to feed and clean using trap dividers, stuff like that. You may walk in there in the beginning and know more than the veterinary staff does about handling feral cats if they are feral. So show them, don't be shy about it. Provide them with trap dividers if they don't have a pair. So we are experiencing a veterinary shortage. I'm sorry, this slide's a little out of date. In New York City, we do have what we call, now it used to be Ask Your Vet, but the newest incarnation is SNAP, Spay Neuter Assistance Program, where we assist caretakers with the cost of surgeries, which in New York City used to be free. And then all of a sudden the COVID and the veterinary shortage came, and they became a lot more expensive. So we devote a lot of our resources now to helping to subsidize spay neuter costs and make it affordable for people to get this done. Another thing you can do is you could support kind of large grassroots clinics where 100, 200 cats are fixed in a weekend. Usually those are held once or twice a month. Training veterinarians on high volume techniques. There are programs popping up. There's one I know in Southern California. There's a veterinarian in Pennsylvania. Good place to go for information about this is the United Spay Alliance. Go to their website, contact them about if you have a veterinarian who's interested, where they might be able to get trained. And in light of the shortage that we're experiencing of spay neuter, I just want to point out that it makes targeting, kind of targeting we talked about in the beginning, even more important. That we use our resources as efficiently as we can. And always just keep in mind, like even at the height of the crisis in New York City, which has begun to ease, where it was really hard to find appointments, that will affect the pace at which you can move, right? So obviously, the more expensive they are and the scarcer they are in terms of spay neuter surgeries, the slower the progress you can make. But that doesn't mean you can't make progress. So don't let it psych you out to the point where you're like, oh, we can't do this. Work with what you have, try to grow that capacity, but keep moving forward, because it may seem really slow today, and then in 6 months, a new clinic opens up and it's gotten a lot better. So just always do the best you can with what you have. Online networks for caretakers, like I said, is a great way for people to solve their own problems without bringing them to you, which is a great thing. Like I said, solve transport, trapping, feeding. The Maui, well, it's not called this anymore. I think they renamed the group, but at the time I made this slide, it was called the Maui Cat Coalition, and there were a couple thousand people actually that were participating in this. So a lot of problem solving going on within the network itself. And your role as a TNR program is simply to kind of create that forum, and probably you need to spend a little bit of time moderating it so that it stays focused and on point and is a safe place where people want to be part of. Also, the Community Cats podcast has a conference Facebook group, which has a couple of thousand people, and that's a great place to join as well. You'll get more of the general advice and on topics, as opposed to I need somebody to help me feed today, but still good network to be part of. You want to be developing an email network, always be collecting people's email addresses, and also because nonprofits need to fundraise, be collecting their mail address, their snail mail addresses too. Caretakers are a network of caretakers is a great thing when you need to fight. You need to advocate for the cats. We've had on Maui a few years ago, some of the conservationists tried to get the county council to basically ban TNR, ban the feeding of cats outdoors. Well, having that network that strong and available really kind of blew away the opposition and kind of quickly put that attempt to rest. Also, social events are a good way to keep your network alive. Occasionally have a fundraiser, and just so people can get together, spend a little time together. Food is probably, if you were to do a survey of your caretakers, what's your top priority in terms of the assistance you need from us post spay neuter, it's going to be food. It can just be an ongoing struggle for some people to feed the cats. So to the extent that you can get a hold of free food and then distribute it, obviously you're never going to be able to provide everybody with all the food they need, but even a little bit now and then So check out local pet stores for recently expired food that's still good. Holiday drives are a great time to kind of collect the stash, maybe get a storage room for, or somewhere to store it, somebody's garage for a month or two, collect a whole bunch over the holidays, and then give it out to people. We also, in New York City, we have a caretaker in need fund where if they lose their job, so we can help them pay for the food for a couple of months. Things like that are all going to be supportive of keeping your community TNR program thriving. Finally, shelter and straw giveaways. If you're in colder climates like New York City, every year we arrange to get pre-made winter shelters for cats from local manufacturers, and then we just pass them along at cost, plus provide straw and because an individual caretaker, I mean, it's not like there are cat winter shelters for sale at Walmart's. You have to find kind of local people who are doing this probably as a part-time gig and don't have the the kind of network of transport and delivery and things like that. So if you can get people shelters at cost and make it convenient for them to pick them up at a certain location and time, that's going to help a lot. And every year, people we don't give away, but we pass on at cost, hundreds of shelters. We do give away those to those people who just can't afford them. And you can see here, this is a photo of a straw giveaway. That's a bale of straw, and by the end of the day, it will have been handed out in garbage bags to an awful lot of people. So again, I want to emphasize that there are a lot of online resources, and you can at times feel like you're alone doing this work, but there's a lot of people doing it. And here's some of the resources available from Neighborhood Cats and Community Cats podcasts. But I would say, your number one resource is you want to join Community Cats podcast Facebook group. Okay, Stacy, I think we can take on question Q&A right now if you'd like.
Okay, so we have a question actually that was sent in before the session even started. A lot of the conversation, your presentation focused on your experience in New York. How do we approach building a movement in rural areas that might have a different set of problems than urban areas? How would you approach a rural area?
Well, I mean, when I was a grants manager at PetSmart Charities, we would our TNR grants required targeting, required really focusing on the community, and there was a rural community in Connecticut, and the person that was implementing the project was having a lot of trouble getting people to be involved. And talking about a farming community where people are spread far out, and there may be a population of a couple thousand people at the most. Well, holding training workshops, and knowing from having done this once, you could hold a workshop and nobody will come, right? So that's not going to be a very effective way to do it. So we went about with this particular project just trying to solve that puzzle, like what will work. And in the end, what we found was, and this is a community where the person doing the project had lived for 8 years, but was considered a newcomer, that kind of thing. So it took talking to the farmers and going to visit, doing face-to-face and educating them about what you're doing. And eventually she found one who was willing, like that pilot project idea, who was willing to give it a try. And then she went all in on making sure that project worked. And then the guy started telling his neighbors, like, oh, hey, my cat problem's a lot better now. And started to spread that way. And then she befriended the one animal control officer in town who happened to be feeding some intact cats. So she did a TNR project for her, and then all of a sudden her eyes opened like, wow, this is a great thing. So I think when you're in a smaller community, like a rural community, there's going to be a lot more face to face, a lot more talking to people, a lot more, hey, let's give it a try, and then let the kind of word of mouth take over. But each community is going to be a little bit different. The big city model is just certainly not going to work everywhere. Bits and pieces of it will, like you're still going to need a trap bank, and you still want to develop an online network to the extent you can, and things like that. But how you break the ice is going to be a little bit different. But it can be done. It ended up being what started off very slowly ended up being a very successful project. I've also
in Vermont, I also know in Vermont, they don't really even use the word community cats much or feral cats. It's pretty much all barn cat programs in Vermont.
Yeah, and that's using the language the community's used to. I know I did one project in a rural part of Wisconsin, and all they had to do was like give them some basic instructions, like, and here's where you bring the cats and give them the traps, and the farmers did all the hands-on work themselves. They didn't need or want hands-on assistance or instruction. They just give me the equipment and tell me where to bring the cats. So again, it's finding out what works in your community, not being too rigid about how you approach it.
Yeah. And if you're running into a scenario where somebody is very anti-TNR and it's sort of a new area, go where you're going to be successful first. Don't fight that person. If you, if you have an alternative, go to what's going to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent piece of advice. You probably should put that in the presentation, because there is a tendency among people in the rescue community to be drawn to the most difficult situations. Like if you have an opportunity to do like a pilot project like this, the city says, okay, here's $2,000. We're going to waive whatever laws that might be in your way, and you've got 6 months to do it. Most rescuers will be like, oh my God, now I can finally tackle the 50 black cats who appear at 4 a.m. behind the railroad station, right? When they should be saying, okay, let me go find my best friend and her 20 cats who we could probably just pick up and put in the traps. That should be your pilot, whatever, because in the end, nobody else is going to know one was hard and one was difficult. They're either going to say it was successful or it failed. So you go to where it's easiest in the beginning, not to where it's hardest.
Right.
Then you get once you've built up your program, then you go get the 50 cats behind the railroad station. But you need to build up to that.
Definitely. A couple of questions about how to develop new spay-neuter capacity or making connections with veterinarians for veterinary support, broken legs, injuries, that kind of thing. Any tips on how to get involved with new veterinarians?
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing to understand is, there's no magic formula, right? There's no magic recitation of words that's going to make them go, oh, okay. What you can do is just be very straightforward, and this is the situation in our community. These are the services that we need. Would you be interested in trying it? And then they will be interested or they won't, right? But sometimes I think people think like we have some abracadabra, right? And then all of a sudden they're pro TNR and want to help you. Every veterinarian is a little bit different. So keep that in mind, just be straightforward. And then if somebody does show interest, a couple of really important tips are start off slow. Don't come in and say, wow, we need 100 spay neuters a month, or we're never going to keep up with this. Just ask them if they can do a couple a week. Let them get to know you, let them get to experience the process. And then as they do, if you are a good client, it will naturally grow into more services. And then that's the second part of it, is be a good client. You'd be surprised how many rescue groups get these opportunities with veterinarians and then they blow them because they don't pay the bill on time, or they don't pick up the cat at the right time, or they try to squeeze them for more services than they're willing to offer, and they end up alienating the veterinarians instead of developing a growing relationship.
Yeah, and if folks are interested in pursuing this topic, certainly the United Spay Alliance is really actively involved. We even have a vet shortage task force that is working on different types of solutions to help increase spay-neuter capacity. I will say California just passed some legislation that is now putting in place a way for vet techs to be able to do neuters on cats in the state of California. So trying to think of some time-saving solutions so that we can have our veterinarians do the veterinary work that they need to do, and really elevating the status of our technicians to be able to do some of the very life-saving work that they can do. So California is leading the charge on that. And then Colorado has some telemedicine options out there too, which may play a role to a certain degree with regards to community cats, or seeing a cat that you can't get your hands on immediately but might need some treatment, that kind of thing too. So there are some outside of the box type solutions in the works. I will also suggest that let you folks know that we have a wet lab program at the United Spay Alliance also, which is helping to teach private practice veterinarians, as well as any veterinarian out there that wants to learn how to do high quality, high volume spay neuter techniques as a best practice. Would be able to do this, and our goal is to have one wet lab in every state, potentially multiple times a month. And it's a way for local veterinarians to network with each other, where we as TNR folks, we don't talk to each other. Well, veterinarians don't talk to each other either. And so they need to network and work together and be able to band together and support each other. And these wet labs have become a great resource for them. And also high volume, high quality, high volume spay neuter techniques that are used in our clinics. That's not what's used in a standard private practice. So it's not this, and it is a best practice to use these high quality, high volume spay neuter techniques. The mortality rates are lower, you know, the numbers are higher. So if we can encourage that to move into private practice, that will build them with extra time for extra capacity for our cats.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, it can be as simple as, like, you can save a lot of time as a veterinarian if you take your sutures off a spool, as opposed to opening individual packets. So just a simple tip like that is not known to most private veterinarians, but if they get exposure to high volume techniques, they become more efficient and they can do more, and that helps them in their private practice as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Wet labs, it's a training session to help train veterinarians, and you can look at the wet labs on the USA page.
What's their web address, Stacey? Just
UnitedSpayAlliance.org. And then for wet labs, there's if you go down one of the projects, and it has a wet lab, the vet shortage task force and wet labs are in there, projects are in there.
Great.
Okay, that's just a comment. Somebody's like, I don't understand why they wouldn't want to have so one of the things you do learn when you're in a wet lab is most veterinarians come in with an incision this size, and they come out with an incision this size, which is actually probably pretty big, maybe even smaller than that. So they learn these techniques. And if you've got a feral cat outside, you know, you certainly, I would love to share this to the public health officials or whatever. I don't want an incision this size. I want a much smaller incision for those cats that are out there. Just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and then they heal a lot faster, and you have to spend less resources on recovery, and you know, yeah.
Do you have any recommendations, Brian? We'll do this last question on, like, you know, how to deal with you know, HOAs, commercial property establishments, restaurants. I mean, how do you, it's part of creating a movement, but it's like you're going at one project at a time. So how do you work with those organizations?
Well, again, you want to, first of all, you know, just your demeanor should be a cooperative one, that you're looking to, you're a problem solver. they're, you know, you're, it's, they probably had a situation with cats for some period of time, right? You probably didn't just, you appear and the cats appear at the same time. So, and they may well have tried to address that, you know, maybe by hiring an extermination company or getting the local ACO to trap them and take them away if they're still willing to do that. Most aren't anymore. And the cats are back. So if you come in and you offer your situation and your services and you do it in a cooperative, non-threatening way, my experience is that most people are willing to give it a try. People love pilots. People love trying things out. You know, it's like buy this and try it for 30 days. And, you know, it's the same thing with TNR, right? You want to give them a kind of risk-free opportunity to give it a shot. And if you take that approach, like what have you got to lose? And in the beginning of a movement, you know, we always tried to make it cost-free. You know, so if it was a high profile project, we felt like this is really going to boost our publicity and our reach, we would just say, all you got to do is open the door, and we would do as much as we could. That's not the standard approach when you're growing your grassroots program and reaching. But in the beginning, when you're trying to get people to accept it, you want to make it as easy as possible for them. So we would talk to the board of directors at an HOA and answer their questions, and, you know, offer to do this at no cost to them. You know, the restaurant owner, you know, whoever it is, if you come in and you say, just give it a try, you know, what have you got to lose? The In my experience, most people will give you that opportunity, and then of course you want to make the absolute most of it. And then you have an example, and when you go to the next restaurant, you might say, hey, look at Fabiano's, you know, situation there is much better. Why don't you give the guy a call if you're not sure? But I need you to cover the cost of the surgery, you know.
Yep. Yeah, no, and I think sharing what your neighbor's done, I mean, or what you've done at a neighbor's is definitely the way to go. So yeah, again, stressing that first pilot project better be successful.
Yeah.
So you have that on your calling card, because they're not going to care who you are. They're going to care about the success of the project down the street. And they'll call, you know, Fabiano or whoever. They'll call. They'll like, yo, what's going on down there? And, you know, find out what's going on and check you out. Make sure you're really who you say you are. And then you just build on that. It's a business. It's like building a business reputation, really.
Yeah, it's like the first park we worked in New York City. We did a really, really good job, you know, and then that word got out to all the parks in New York City, right? Because it's the parks department, and it's just that's how the word spreads. Is, you know, you do it really well, and then once you're having a lot of demand, then now the movement has shifted to a different place, and you can probably be a little more demanding of what you're requiring and a little more selective about what you do. But in the beginning, yeah, you want to totally stack the deck, you know, and make sure that you have that early success to use as a model.
Yep. All right, folks. Well, it is the end of our session. I want to thank you all for turning your passion for cats into action. And there are a few questions I was not able to get to. Susie or I will make sure we get responses to them. There was actually one question I did want to mention about being a virtual volunteer that may not be actively out there trapping, and what they can do to move the movement. So, you know, that's something I'll be responding to, because here I am, Brian, we're not trapping right now. So this is what we're doing. So there can be a lot more of us doing this out there and getting out in the community and making TNR really, you know, the normalization of TNR, making it successful that way. I don't know, Brian, any last thoughts?
Yeah, you know, when you're operating on a community scale, there's a lot of coordination. So that's not something you have to be out in the field to do. If you can be at your computer and you can help connect people with resources and, you know, put the various pieces of the TNR puzzle together for a project, that's a huge help.
Yep. All right. Well, if folks are interested in doing the virtual volunteer thing, you can always email me, Stacy at communitycatspodcast.com, and maybe we'll get a little group of us all together that are really advocating for trap, neuter, return. Also check out my community cat pyramid, which is another way of trying trying to be successful and showing us how to work in the communities. Brian, thank you again. This is great. Susie, thank you in the background. I'm shouting through because Susie's not here on the camera. I'm like, Susie, thank you for answering questions in the background. Kristen, as always, thank you for being our technical tabby. Again, everybody, thank you for turning your passion for cats into action.